couldn't get my dress shoes on. I tried and tried. So I finally got mad and I quit. So I just wear my work boots to church. Then I couldn't get my suspenders. And I quit fiddling with them, figured out they're broke. Snaps on my shirt wouldn't line up. I couldn't get the things to snap shut. Then I got out the truck, had to wipe snow off the windows. And I knew I was pushing it right up to the minute. Did you see on the news this morning where Nancy Pelosi has called in the priest and she wants an exorcism done on her home? I thought, well, Gadarene demoniac, there goes your record. Take your Bible, let's turn to Daniel chapter 11 this morning. We're getting close to being through the book of Daniel, and we'll go right straight to the book of Revelation after this. Daniel chapter 11, verses 1 and 2. Also I, in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I stood to confirm and to strengthen him. And now will I show thee the truth. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, and the fourth shall be far richer than they all, and by his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia. Like I said last week, really, they've broken up chapter 10, 11, and 12 into 3 chapters. They all go together. It's one continuous vision, theme, subject through all 3 of these chapters. And so 11 just continues from where we stopped in chapter 10, and this angelic person is communicating to Daniel the visions that he's had and explaining them to him. In chapter 11, he gets into great detail about future events. Now, chapter 11's the one that gives the Bible skeptics and the Easter Bunny Christians fits, because it has such detail in it over almost a 400-year period that they say it had to be written after the fact, that no prophet could foretell things in this detail and be so accurate about every one of them. Well, they say Daniel had to have been written sometime around 160 BC. The only problem with sticking to that is the Septuagint was written about 75 to 100 years before 160 BC, and it contained the book of Daniel. And I'm going to share a story with you here in a little bit from Josephus that leaves no doubt whatsoever that Daniel wrote the book in his day, in his time, and it was God-inspired prophecy. And that's where I think they hang up, is these attributes of God. See, we can use words like omniscient, but we really can't wrap our head around what that really means. I mean, it's one thing to say, I know and understand that God knows everything. Ken Jennings almost is there if you watch Jeopardy. But to say God not only knows everything, but He knows everything past, present, and future. He knows everything that's going to happen before it happens. And as we look at these through this book of Daniel, we see God involved in things that it's not just His omniscience at work, but His omnipotence and His omnipresence. All of His characteristics of God are on full display here. And when you accept that this is God-inspired prophecy through the prophet Daniel, then it just screams that the Bible is true. And to doubt it or question it is wrong. Well, the angel here tells Daniel that there's going to be 3 more kings in Persia. And the 4th one is going to be richer and stronger than the 3 before him. And we know the 4th one was a man named Xerxes. He was much more powerful and richer than Cyrus or any of the kings that came before him, so much so that he decided he was going to conquer Greece and invade Greece. And while he gave it a good effort, he didn't quite succeed. And you've seen, well, maybe you haven't, it's kind of not a movie for the ladies. My wife wouldn't watch it. But the movie 300, the Battle of Thermopylae, when Xerxes took on the Grecian warriors and they funneled him into a tight little passageway and stood their ground for quite a while. And I don't know why the movie put the dark spiritual aspect on the Persians and Xerxes like they did, but anyway, it is history. And we also know that Xerxes was behind the plot to kill the Jews. If you find that in the Esther chapter 3, and a man named Haman. So, as we go through this, you remember, this is about the Jewish people. Gabriel and the angel that's communicating with Daniel now has been very specific that this is about your people. And so Xerxes and Persia, they tried to destroy the Jews. Antiochus in Greece tried to destroy the Jews. And so that mainly is what this is going to focus upon now, is the Grecian empires and how they affected Israel and the Jewish people. So look in verses 3 and 4. And a mighty king shall stand up, that shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. And when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken and shall be divided toward the 4 winds of heaven, and not to his posterity, nor according to his dominion, which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up, even for others besides those. So we know the mighty king that comes after Persia here, and because of the other descriptions in this passage about being broken up into the 4 winds, We know now that the angel's describing to Daniel about Alexander the great dominion that he had over the Middle East and Europe and Asia. And he did as he pleased. And we know he died an early death. He was only 32, 33 years old. I read this week, found out that he came down with a fever after a heavy drinking party. And there's some others that intimated that Alexander was a sodomite, and I don't know if that's true or not, but after a heavy drinking party, he came down with a fever. He died very early age, and he had no heirs. Now, as great as Alexander was and the accomplishments and everything that he is, why do you think he was brushed aside here just in a couple of passages? And that's all he's mentioned in this whole chapter 11, just a couple little verses here, and we're talked about and we're done with Alexander. It's because he was no threat whatsoever to the Jews. If you look in Josephus' Antiquities of the Jew, book XI, it's 11, right? Chapter 8. You'll find a account recorded by Josephus as Alexander and his armies are marching on Jerusalem. They've already conquered Gaza and all the surrounding Syria and the surrounding regions, and they're marching in on Jerusalem. And the high priest, Josephus describes as being in agony, not knowing what to do, they knew they're not going to defeat him, but how do we handle Alexander the Great marching down on us? And about the day before Alexander gets to Jerusalem, God gives a vision to the high priest. Don't fight him. Just go out and greet him. Welcome him to Jerusalem. And so they did. And so when they went out, the high priest had on his mitre and all the garb and everything. Everything that they wore to be identified by. They went out, him and people of Jerusalem went out to meet Alexander. And when they come up, Alexander's like, oh, whoa, wait, hang on. 3 years ago, I had a dream, and I saw you. Talking about the high priest. Exactly you. And the high priest took him into the temple. And here's how we know when Daniel was written. The high priest took Alexander into the temple, opened the scroll to Daniel, and showed him the scripture. This is you, Alexander.
Yes.
God was telling us however 100 years before this that you were coming and you would be here. And Alexander was so impressed by it, the dream, the vision he had of the high priest, seeing that in the scrolls, that he actually had a prayer service with them. When they were done, he took his armies, turned around, and left. Never threatened Israel or Jerusalem again. But as we've discussed before, Alexander's early death, not having any heirs, the vast empire that he had conquered, the Bible here refers to the four winds. We know in other places it's always broken up into four. Four of Alexander's main generals divided his entire kingdom up amongst themselves. Now, this prophecy, this chapter here, only deals with two of them. The general that went back to Greece and took that empire, and the one that stayed in the east and took that empire, they're not even mentioned here and talked about because it had no effect upon the Jewish people in Israel. Two of them did, though. The one named Ptolemy took over Egypt, and throughout the rest of this, he's referred to as the king of the south. And Seleucid took over Syria, and he was referred to in the rest of this prophecy as the king of the north. Now, these two kings fought over control of Israel and the Holy Land for 130 years. They fought constantly, nonstop, with Israel caught in the middle. And so a big section of chapter 11 is Daniel describing in detail the battles that took place between these two kings. We're going to take a look kind of at the first one and the last one, and in between, it's simply a matter of the king of the north got a bigger army than the king of the south, and he goes down and beats him. Then the king of the south gets a bigger army than the king of the north, and he goes, and it just goes back and forth, back and forth. But there's some interesting stuff here in the first and some of the last ones, and we'll take a look at them. We'll look at verses 5 through 9. And the king of the south shall be strong, and one of his princes, and he shall be strong above him, and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion, and in the end of years they shall join themselves together. For the king's daughter of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement, but she shall not retain the power of the arm, neither shall he stand nor his arm, but she shall be given up, and they that brought her, and he that begat her, and he that strengthened her in these times. But out of a branch of her roots shall one stand up in his estate, which shall come with an army, and shall enter into the fortress of the king of the north, and shall deal against them, and shall prevail, and shall also carry captives into Egypt their gods, with their princes, and with their precious vessels of silver and of gold, and he shall continue more years than the king of the north. So the king of the south shall come into his kingdom, and shall return into his own land. But what happened there was the king of the south thought, it'd be a good idea if I send one of my daughters up to the king of the north, and they can get married, and we'll have some kind of a political agreement and alliance with one another. Maybe it'll stop all this fighting. Problem was, the king of the north was already married. Well, the daughter of the king of the south, and I don't know, I do know men, maybe she was younger and prettier than the wife he had. So he divorces his wife, marries this daughter from the king of the south. Well, the jilted wife kills the daughter of the king of the south, or her husband doesn't want to be alone anymore, so he takes her back, remarries her, she kills him. That puts her sons back in line for lineage to the kingdom of the north. Now, this branch of her roots, Daniel mentions here, the daughter of the king of the south, because word got back to Egypt that she'd been killed, and everybody that went with her, all her, whatever you want to call them, her helpers, aides, they killed them all. Her brother rises up to take vengeance. And it says he gets a big army together and he goes up there and he defeats the north. Now it's back and forth between the north and the south now, and it almost sounds like we're talking about the Civil War here, but let's just look at verses 10 through 16. I want to just read through them as this goes back and forth, and it's simply, this is a matter of this king defeats that king, then that king gets an army and goes back and defeats that other king. So let's just look at verses 10 through 16. But his sons shall be stirred up and shall assemble a multitude of great forces, and one shall certainly come and overflow and pass through. Then shall he return and be stirred up even to his fortress. And the king of the south shall be moved with choler, that's rage, and shall come forth and fight with him, even with the king of the north. And he shall set forth a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given into his hand. And when he hath taken away the multitude, his heart shall be lifted up, and he shall cast down many 10,000s, but he shall not be strengthened by it. Now it says he literally slaughtered the armies of the north, but it says here by 10,000. But they said he was so addicted to the licentious lifestyle that he lived back in Egypt, he took no advantage of defeating this army. He just went up, killed a bunch of them, beat them, turned around, and went back, lived the life he was living in Egypt. Let's see. Pick up verse 13. For the king of the north shall return and shall set forth a multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come after certain years with a great army and with much riches. And in those times there shall many stand up against the king of the south, also the robbers of thy people. That's some Israelite mercenaries, shall exalt themselves to establish division, but they shall fall. So the king of the north shall come and cast up a mount and take the most fenced cities, and the arms of the south shall not withstand, neither his chosen people, neither shall there be any strength to withstand. But he that cometh against him shall do according to his own will, and none shall stand before him, and he shall stand in the glorious land, which by his hand shall be consumed. So that's kind of the back and forth between king of the north, king of the south. We'll pick up verses 17 through 19. He shall also set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom, and upright ones with him. Thus shall he do, and he shall give him the daughter of women, corrupting her, but she shall not stand on his side, neither be for him. After this shall he turn his face unto the isles, and shall take many but a prince for his own behalf shall cause the reproach offered by him to cease. Without his own reproach, he shall cause it to turn upon him. Then he shall turn his face toward the fort of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and not be found. So the king of the north, and I've got to be careful here because there's a whole succession of them named Antiochus. And right now we're talking about Antiochus the Third. History, a lot of the historians refer to him as Antiochus the Great. So at this time, the king of the north is ruling Israel and the Holy Land plus Syria. And because of the feud that goes on between him and the north, and remember, this has gone through several kings in each land now, but this feud, I mean, it's the Hatfields and McCoys all over. He wants to destroy the South. So he gives his daughter to go marry the king of the South, who happens to only be 7 years old at the time. You want to guess what his daughter's name was? Cleopatra. Not, now I got to stop you. Not the queen of Egypt that was about 100 years after this, but this was a great-grandmother. The Queen Cleopatra was a descendant of this Cleopatra. Well, it didn't work out like the king of the north wanted it to. She didn't go down and spy on them and try to, turn people against their own king. She actually was loyal to the king of the south and to the people there. And so when the king of the north went down to attack them, he was defeated and turned back. And so as he went back, said he set his sights on the coastlands. Now he's looking at Greece and Thrace, and he had, you ever heard General Hannibal of Carthage? He had him as an ally, but when they got to Greece, there was a rising superpower showing up at the time, and he ran into the Roman army, which he was not able to stand against them. And so the Roman army sends Antiochus III back to Syria in shame. Now, Daniel here talks about him, the king of the north, stumbling and falling and not being found. Broke and in desperate need of money, Antiochus III pillages a Babylonian temple. He so enrages the local people that they overtake him and his army and kill him. So look in verse 20. Then shall stand up in his estate a raiser of taxes in the glory of the kingdom, but within few days he shall be destroyed, neither in anger nor in battle. This is the very short reign of Seleucus III. And so now we're getting ready to be introduced into the one who killed him, and that's Antiochus IV. And actually, brothers. But yeah, just through jealousy or whatever we want to call it, Antiochus IV killed Seleucus III, and he became king. And so we'll get into some familiar descriptions of him here. Look in verse 21. And in his estate shall stand up a vile person. Remember the one who speaks blasphemies? To whom they shall not give the honor of the kingdom, but he shall come in peaceably and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. So Antiochus IV comes in. Daniel describes peaceably, but speaking lies. So as we look at history, he was able to gain an ally by flattery. King Eumenes, I probably didn't pronounce that right, of Pergamus. He flattered the Romans to get in good with them and actually paid the tribute that his father didn't pay. And he gained the Syrians' trust by, we would call him a smooth-talking politician. He promised them lots of good things and flattered them, and so they took him in and accepted him. Now, he gave himself the title of Epiphanes. And we know that's the glorious or the illustrious one. They believed, he actually thought that he was a god, and that's not many rulers in ancient times either believed that they were a god or that they were God's man on earth. And so that's not really that unusual. I can't pronounce it, but the Israelites had a surname for him, it meant madman, and that's literally what he turned out to be. But let's look at some of his exploits, verses 22 through 27. And with the arms of a flood they shall be overflown from before him, and shall be broken. Yea, also the prince of the covenant. And after the league made with him, he shall work deceitfully, for he shall come up and shall become strong with a small people. He shall enter peaceably even upon the fattest places of the province, and he shall do that which his fathers have not done, nor his fathers' fathers. He shall scatter among them the prey and spoil and riches, yea, and he shall forecast his devices against the strongholds, even for a time. Let's see, where was it going to stop? 27. And he shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south with a great army, and the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty army, but he shall not stand, for they shall forecast devices against him. Yea, they that feed of the portion of his meat shall destroy him, and his army shall overflow, and many shall fall down slain. And both these kings' hearts shall be to do mischief, and they shall speak lies at one table, but it shall not prosper, for yet the end shall be at the time appointed. Well, Antiochus deceitfully he lies to the king of the south, and he's wanting to make some kind of a peace agreement, a covenant with the king. And when he shows up down there with a great army. Well, he failed with his deceit, and a battle ensued. No side, neither one really won here. Reading this description, many were slain, many died. It was kind of a draw between the two. So they pull back. Antiochus attacks the second time. This time he's defeated. Him and his army are swept away because someone showed up. Egypt had an ally sitting out there in the wings waiting. And Rome comes in. And the Roman Navy and Roman army defeats Antiochus. The Roman general brings Antiochus down to the beach. And they're standing there. He takes a stick and he draws a circle around Antiochus. He says, you got to tell me what your intent is. You're going to fight on and die, or you're going to surrender. But you're going to tell me what your intent is before you step outside that circle. Well, having no choice, Antiochus surrenders. From that point on, Antiochus and the Seleucid Empire, Syria, was under the rule of the Roman Empire. And there's a passage here, kind of jumps ahead, but it tells us of the end of Antiochus. Egypt didn't kill him. Rome didn't kill him. Israel didn't kill him. It says those who ate his own meat. So somewhere down the road, after a lot more takes place, this isn't something that happened right now, but Daniel's foretelling what would happen to Antiochus IV. He was eventually killed by his own council. His own people killed him. Well, let's look verses 28 through 35 now. Then shall he return into his land with great riches, and his heart shall be against the holy covenant, and he shall do exploits and return to his own land. At the time appointed he shall return and come toward the south, but it shall not be as the former or as the latter. For the ships of Chittim shall come against him, therefore he shall be grieved, and return and have indignation against the holy covenant. So shall he do. He shall even return and have intelligence with them that forsake the holy covenant. And arms shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. And such as do wickedly against the covenant shall be corrupt by flatteries. Write this verse down, ingrain it into your brain and your heart right now, this morning. But the people that do know their God shall be strong and do exploits. And they that understand among the people shall instruct many, yet they shall fall by the sword, and by flame, by captivity, and by spoil many days. Now when they shall fall, they shall be holpen with a little help. but many shall cleave to them with flatteries. And some of them of understanding shall fall to try them and to purge and to make them white, even to the time of the end, because it is yet for a time appointed. So Antiochus tries another expedition here, and the Bible tells us he's defeated. So defeated, humiliated, filled with rage, he heads back to Syria, but he stops in Jerusalem, and he takes his anger out upon the Jewish people. He goes into the temple, and he places a statue of Zeus in the temple. And we talked a couple of weeks ago about what he did. He desecrated the altar by sacrificing a pig on the altar, and then forced the Jewish people to eat the pig. After that, he took away the daily sacrifices, which they wouldn't have sacrificed anyway because the temple is now unclean. They couldn't have done it. And he forced Greek culture on the people. Daniel draws a sharp contrast between two types of people, and we still have them with us today. There are those who are given to do wickedly, who are corrupted with flattery. And he's talking about the people of God, Jewish people. And I would say there's plenty today who call themselves Christians who are given to do wickedly. And they feel all flattered when the world tells them what a great Christian they are. And, oh, you're just a perfect example of what we think a Christian ought to be. And then there's another group of people. The people who know their God. Daniel says they are going to be strong, faithful, and unmovable. And I wanted to kind of just stop here for just a second because we've got time coming. I used the term earlier in the lesson this morning of the Easter Bunny Christians. Well, we could call them the Santa Claus Christians. You know, they show up for church once or twice a year, and the rest of the time they're so occupied indulging themselves in the world, you wouldn't be able to know the difference between them. There's a time coming, and I don't think it's far. Us people say, oh, it's still way off down. No, we're not far from it in our land where we live right here today. The pressure cooker has been turned on, the pot's heating up, and it's fixing to get hot. And it's going to separate the casual Christian from the faithful few. Everybody keeps waiting for that great falling away to take place. It's already happened. It's already happened. And it didn't take any real persecution other than the world making a little bit of fun of us, deriding Christians just a little bit. Antiochus, history tells us, when he was in Jerusalem, killed 80,000 Jews. Took another 40,000 captive, sold another 40,000 into slavery. If you're a Christian in America today, and because of your faith you refuse to do service to certain clientele, what are they going to do to you? Take your livelihood away from you, prosecute you, fine you, maybe throw you in jail. If you have a public platform and you say the wrong thing, that's all you've got to do, just say the wrong thing. And it gets out into the public. What are they going to do? You're going to be canceled. No time whatsoever forgotten about. Don't tell me that persecution's not coming. Where we may have to make choices between bowing to the world or dying. You say, oh, you die. There's no way. No. Look at our government today, what it's mostly occupied with doing. Read the first chapter in the book of Romans. Right. That's not just talking about sodomy, homosexual activity. It talks about people changing the image of God, people calling what's evil good, having no conscience towards God or the things of God. It says God gave them over to a reprobate mind. Don't tell me that somebody can't look in the mirror and tell what gender they were when they're born.
Amen, brother.
Reprobate mind? I'm not talking about those sickos. I'm talking about the government that's supporting them and passing laws that tell me if I say anything, if I do anything, if I take any action whatsoever to proclaim that they're wrong, the full weight of the government is going to come down on me. Our government is infested with a reprobate mind. Yeah. It's not long. We don't have long left in this country. And you'd better know who your God is, who you fear, and who you're choosing to serve. The people who know their God shall be strong and do great exploits. Well, as cruel as Antiochus IV was, there was a group of Jews that had enough of it. Judas Maccabees put together a small army using guerrilla warfare tactics. They become such a thorn in the side to Antiochus and his armies that they picked up and left him alone. And after that, they went back through, cleansed their temple, restored the sacrifice, and brought their house of worship back to a place where the people could get together and worship their God. Next week, we'll move from Antiochus to that man of sin, the son of perdition, the Antichrist. We'll finish chapter 11. Chapter 12 is pretty short. Like I said, they all go together. But we may, Lord willing, we'll see. We might be finished with the book of Daniel next week. Thanks for being here this morning.